To apply this to Eddie, let's start by reassessing the facts we have on him, and then we can get into more of the theoretical stuff. We know that he entered the new universe sometime in the early to mid 1960s. We know that at some point past the age of 18, he joined the Air Force, and that he was a jet pilot. We know that he's the director of Requiem, but we also know that just prior to this, he was the Associate Deputy Director of the Office of Extraregular Activities, a shadow subgroup within the CIA. What else do we know about him for certain? We know that he has a wife and child, as evidenced by pictures on his desk within his office. And most of all, we know he's a very shady individual who doesn't want people to know his identity. A fact that is closely connected to another, that he's secretly acting for the benefit of an unknown group separate from the CIA. Something that runs deeper than the CIA, and most likely deeper than the US or any other world government at large. We can say all of that within reasonable certainty based on the facts that we have about him. Now, to start getting to the theoretical stuff, let's take these facts and see if we can't backtrace them to other more niche elements and mysteries that have been brewing within the background of the main overlying plot of this chapter in the story. After looking around for a bit, you'll notice something. Back right after Firebase Z released, we got an intel in which Samantha recounts a dream she keeps having. In this dream, she sees the face of a child, a boy who she feels is lost, damaged, but also somehow dangerous. Anyone trying to follow along at the time would have taken notice of this intel, more than likely, but due to it not having any apparent meaning at the time of release, nor close after, a lot of us likely would have forgotten it. Let's keep going for now. The next piece we have that's relevant to this was when we began to learn of an operation that was carried out by Weaver and Samantha on behalf of the CIA. A sanctioned Black Op assassination of a high-value target. An assassination in which the target's wife and child were killed in a house fire, started by Weaver in order to cover his tracks. Nothing is explicitly outright said here, but you can see the connection between this and the wife and child of Eddie. Why else make mention of the target's wife and child, and later also make mention of a completely separate man's wife and child if the two aren't connected? And because both don't necessarily have anything to do with the actual story itself. That'd just be redundant and kinda strange. So with this, we now have our theory. One that we can somewhat start piecing together a potential arc for Eddie's character to undergo. The theory is that Eddie's wife and child burned to death in a house fire. Potential evidence to support this is the fact that the house within the snow globe on Eddie's desk has a glow coming from within it, almost like it's burning. A coincidence maybe, but it's also a possible connection between the two. That aside, the burning question then becomes, if the CIA tried to assassinate him, then why does he currently lead a department within the CIA? That's a question that with the current information we have, we can discern no real answer for. But what other questions come from this? Well, for one, what's Eddie's motivation for joining the very organization that tried to kill him? Questions like these are instrumental for trying to figure out what Eddie's or any other character arc might look like. In the case of Eddie, revenge against the ones who wronged him seems likely. After all, if this were true, he would have appointed the very man who took everything from him as the leading officer for his department. He would have put him close to him, right where he wants him potentially. Aside from this, what other aspects can we look at to discern his arc? Let's take a closer look at his employers. Another part of this story that remains outwardly cloaked in mystery. Well, for starters, we know they operate on a level that goes deeper than the CIA. We've established that. The intel in which we learn about this also establishes that Eddie sits on a board of multiple directors within this group or company, which they appear to be operating as. Their shadowy nature automatically conjures in our mind mental images of secret societies, such as the Illuminati, conspiracies about hidden groups and organizations that secretly control the planet. With this in our mind, we'll need to examine the story for anything that fits this, just as we did for Eddie's family. In Vanguard Zombies, we are almost immediately introduced to a perfect match: the Society Occult, a secret society that has been around and in contact with the Dark Ether since our Middle Ages. A group which has used their knowledge to leverage power and wealth in our own reality. These people dominated Europe from behind the scenes for almost millennia. They could have just as easily spread to the Americas as well. And as you can see, we now have evidence to believe that they indeed have done just that. Based on this, we can reasonably assume that the people Eddie works for are the Society Occult. That the group had traded in their clothes and rituals for suits and boardroom meetings. A new layer of the theory has been created. What else can this relate to? And more importantly, how can this revelation shape his potential arc even further? Throughout Cold War Zombies, it's apparent that the biggest mystery Treyarch wants us to be thinking about is Project Janus. Something we have no real information on whatsoever outside of a few crumbs we were given throughout the game's lifecycle. But more importantly for us here today is one that has a direct connection to the people Eddie works for. They're the ones who created the project, as indicated in the initial intel where we first learned of them. As stated, we know almost nothing of the actual project itself, but for the sake of the theory, let's dive into the name itself. In Roman mythology, Janus is the two-faced god of doorways, transitions, gateways, beginnings, endings, time, and duality, among other things. He is the god that peers both backwards into the past and forwards into the future. There's a lot of things you can glean from that description that may be relevant here. But for the sake of the theory, let's focus on his two-faced nature. What I personally see in this is that the project itself is two-faced. Or perhaps more accurately, Eddie is the one who's being two-faced. Throughout the story thus far, one thing more than anything has been clear about Eddie as a person, and that's the fact that he seems more than willing to exploit both sides of any one ordeal in order to make sure he comes out on top. He did this with Requiem and Omega. Could he be doing the same here? I believe the answer is almost certainly yes. And by using what we've pieced together thus far, we can see why that is, and add yet another layer onto our overall theory, and project a clearer image of what his overall story arc more than likely looks like. My theory is that Eddie has embedded himself within the CIA, rose to the top to become the eventual director of Requiem, on the guise of using his newfound position to benefit his leaders, but also secretly to exact his revenge on the ones who took his family from him. And in doing so, is working towards completing Project Janus for his nefarious overlords within the Society Occult, but also for himself, hence the two-faced nature of Janus. Now, we cannot for certain know what the Society's version of Project Janus looks like, but from looking over what we pieced together using the tools I've given you thus far, I believe we can accurately discern what his own version of it looks like, and that is to revive his dead child, the one thing most precious to any loving father. Now, that's a big claim, and yes, while this could be a load of nonsense backed up by pure coincidences, that in itself is the nature and beauty of making theories, and this leads me to my next point. When you've finally gotten to a point where your own theory feels like it's come together, take a moment to ask yourself, does this make sense? If it does, great, that's good. Now, look for supplementary evidence to support your theory. That snow globe we mentioned earlier, that's a perfect example of the kind of evidence you should be looking for at this stage. Look at character dialogue both in and outside of the main Easter egg / main quest. Go back and re-examine as many radios as you can. You might just notice something that hadn't prior stood out to you. Look at Pack-a-Punch weapon names. Even the smallest things could hold evidence that further supports your claims. As mentioned earlier, don't forget to also be looking out for mythological tie-ins. A lot of pack names, for instance, use names based on mythological figures. If the weapon itself is tied to a specific character, then don't be afraid to try and draw similarities between the two. Another thing that could be a potential use is to go back and look for new evidence in your older theories, even if it's theories that don't make a lick of sense today. That scrap heap could hold the parts that you need in order to bolster your current ideas. And finally, the most important thing you can do is to actively be on the lookout for things that go against your theory. And if you do find something, don't just ignore it. You need to fully absorb it and try and understand how much of your theory it invalidates. It may be something small where you can change one little thing and all of a sudden it makes perfect sense again. Or it can really shatter the whole thing and destroy it completely. If you do find something that completely invalidates your ideas, that's tragic. This may have been something you put a lot of thought into, something you've spent hours crafting. I've been there, and it sucks. But understand, in that failure, you've still learned a lot by going through the experience. And now that you know what to be looking for, you can realign yourself back on the main path, look at the thing that invalidated it in the first place, and try to look back and see where you started to go off course. Get back to what you know with absolute certainty to be fact, and use it as a ground floor to start building back up again on a slightly or sometimes vastly different train of thought. The only way you can become proficient in crafting your own theories is via trial and error, because you likely won't be correct in your ideas the first time around. I know I wasn't. The last piece of advice I can give you today is simply to find like-minded people and talk about the story with them. Let them know what you think. Discuss your ideas with them, and also take their ideas into consideration as well. Some people are able to look at things from a different perspective than we can, and that can really sometimes be helpful to you in the long run. Sometimes they won't be right. Sometimes you won't be right. But it's important to really look at what other people in the community think, regardless of if you agree with them or not. Because otherwise, you risk becoming too set within your own perception of the story, and that just won't help you whatsoever. You wouldn't want to drink too much of your own Kool-Aid and wind up blocking others out. That'll just result in people disregarding your ideas altogether. In terms of where to find people, generally I would say to avoid the CoD subreddits. Any and every fandom has toxicity, but that's mostly a cesspit that I would want to stay away from. I mainly use Twitter. That's where I've been able to grow the most and find others, but over time we've also launched our very own Discord completely devoted to discussing all things CoD lore related. We even have a wide variety of resources for you to use, such as timelines and intel compilations. So if that sounds like something you want to be a part of, there will be a link in the description below. And there we have it. Suspend disbelief. Play the game. Learn a character. View the story as one continuous journey. Craft theories. Look for mythological influences. Think from the writer's perspective. Test your theories. And last but not least, communicate. I really hope you were able to take away something from this series and learn something. If you did, I have truly achieved my goal with this project, and I thank you for watching. If you think I may have left something out that would otherwise have benefited this series, please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more videos like this, then like and subscribe as well as check out all of my other forms of social media. Links to all that and our Discord will be in the description below. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.